Tonight on Primetime Politics, closing arguments.
I'm asking for your vote to stand up to Donald Trump.
On Monday, we all need to vote for change. Now let's bring it home.
So send us to Ottawa to hold the line, to stand up for everyday people, to fight for you.
Political leaders pick up their pace in a final dash for votes ahead of Election Day. Coming up, polls analyst Éric Grenier will break down what the numbers are telling us ahead of Monday night, and the Ottawa bureau chiefs will fill us in. What are they hearing from the political parties on this final weekend? This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, in just 3 days' time, we will know who Canadians choose as their next leader and government. The Liberals have, throughout this campaign, been leading in the vast majority of polls, but some analysts say things are tightening up. Éric Grenier will tell us if he agrees or disagrees in a moment, but first, take a look at some of the final ads the top three political parties are sharing over this last weekend of the campaign.
Canada can't afford a fourth Liberal term. The Conservative Plan for Change will scrap Liberal anti-energy laws, greenlight resource projects, and train 350,000 new workers to unleash Canada's resources and end our dependence on America. Vote for change. Vote Conservative.
Mark Carney has managed big crises before, and he knows how to build a strong economy. Now is the time to unite and stand up to President Trump. This election, vote for Mark Carney.
Hi, I'm Libby Davies. I know from experience, my own experience as a member of Parliament, that when we're not there, things are really bad. But when we are there, as we saw in this last Parliament, we can win gains for people. So this election, more than ever, it is so important to send new Democrats to Ottawa. And our incumbents, they are fighters.
So those are just some of the closing arguments that we're hearing from the political parties as we head into the final weekend of this campaign. And to walk us through what we are seeing in the polls is Éric Grenier, polls analyst, founder, and writer behind The Writ. Hello to you, Éric.
Hi, Michael.
And we should note the fact that you're standing in front of the smart board that you'll actually be operating during our election special come Monday. So thank you for that. But right now, let's talk about your latest numbers, beginning with your top line. And we do have the other polls that you base your top line number at. And you know, when you look at this, some interesting numbers. Main Street have both the Liberals and Conservatives running fairly close of each other. Innovative actually has a tie between the two. But when you actually crunch these numbers and put them into your calculations, what are you finding?
Well, we do find that the Liberals are still holding the lead in the consensus of the polls. You're right, we've seen a handful of surveys that have put the margin more or less tied with the Liberals and the Conservatives, but on average, we're having the Liberals somewhere around 42% support when we're looking at the broader range of polls and the more that we're expecting to come out over the weekend. The Conservatives are just under 39%, so we've seen that the gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives has dropped from around the 5-6 point where it was perhaps before the debates, now to more of a 3 to 4 point range. The NDP still in a lot of trouble with under 9% support. But that Liberal lead nationally, 3 to 4 points, regionally speaking, it is a lot more significant, and it's one of the reasons why they're still favored to win the most seats.
Okay, still favored, but talk to us right now about where the Liberals may be vulnerable when you look at some of those numbers.
Yeah, there's a couple places that the Liberals really need to make sure that they win them, they make their gains, and they make their holds in order to hold on to the seats projection that they are currently expected to make, which is around 190 seats that the Liberals would be projected to win right now. There's a couple of regions I would point to. One would be in Quebec is one, we can look at the results from the last election, especially in and around Montreal. Now, a lot of this area is currently held by the Bloc Québécois in the suburbs, north and south of Montreal. This is going to be a region where the Liberals are expected to make some gains, and it is one of the regions where it would deliver a majority government. But if we go back to look at another region of the country in Ontario, the Greater Toronto Area, of course, that is where elections are decided. These were the results in the last election. If this stays red, then the Liberals will be able to build on the kind of gains that they are expected to make in places like Quebec and British Columbia in order to get that majority government.
Okay, if they hold red, but as we say at this point, some of the tightening numbers, that's what we're going to be watching for very closely when it comes to the regions. But, you know, let's get back a little bit to Quebec because you did mention where the Bloc were in the last election. How are things looking for the Bloc? Because, you know, earlier this week, there were polls indicating that the Quebec race was tightening.
Yeah, we are seeing that the Bloc is a little bit more competitive competitive than it was, I would say, before the debate. A lot of the province, especially in the southern part of the province, which is where the election will be decided, was bloc teal, if we can call it that, in the last election. There was the potential for the Liberals to make significant gains in Quebec. At one point, we only projected maybe 16 seats for the Bloc Québécois, so half of what they had in the last election. They're now over 20. They're projected to win maybe 22 seats. And so that is something that is limiting the Liberals' potential to win that majority government. They're still projected to make some gains in Quebec, again, primarily around the Montreal area. But it is now a bit more of an open question whether the Liberals will be able to make those gains and build that cushion past the 172 seats they need for that majority.
Okay, still a question, but of course you've crunched what you've seen so far into your seat projection. What are you thinking showing right now?
Well, we are showing that the Liberals are in that position to win a majority government. 190 seats is where they are in the projection. But if we take into account all those close races, all those toss-up races, there is the potential that if they all go to another party, the Bloc, the Conservatives, and the NDP, that the Liberals could find themselves in minority territory. So it's by no means a given that they're in majority territory at the moment, but that is what is the most likely outcome. The Conservatives are projected to win roughly as many seats as they had in the last election, so not really a lot of prospects for growth, while the Bloc Québécois, as I mentioned, could drop as many as 10 seats down to 22, and the NDP were projected to win 5 seats at the moment. But there is a big range of potential outcomes for them depending on how effective their incumbents would be to retain their vote and really survive what is a very rough election for the New Democrats.
Okay, so those are your projections and things that we're going to be watching out for. But, you know, I do want to raise the issue of Alberta because, you know, we've been talking on and off through the course of this campaign about potential Liberal gains in Alberta. How is that looking at this moment in time? Is that a possibility?
Well, we've seen that in the polls. The Liberals are doing better in Alberta. In around 28% support or so based on the averages of all the polls that are being done. And that is above where Justin Trudeau was in 2015 when they won 4 seats, 2 in Edmonton and 2 in Calgary. So I think there is the potential for the Liberals to replicate some of those gains that they made last time. A lot of blue, certainly in the rural parts of the province. But if we're talking about Edmonton, you know, the NDP had 2 seats. With the change of boundaries, the Conservatives would have picked up Edmonton Centre. Could a lot of those ridings actually be pretty close? There's some discussion about the potential for the Liberals to make some gains there. And then also in Calgary. Calgary, they had Calgary McKnight last time. There is the potential for the Liberals to make a run at a number of seats in the province. But is it actually going to happen? I think that is the big question that we have in Alberta. The numbers suggest that the Liberals are competitive. It's just the reality of it, and it's one of the things we'll have to wait and see on Monday night.
Wait and see, and of course we'll be talking throughout the Monday special as we bring live coverage of the election results, and you'll be at the Smart Board. But for now, Eric, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so those are the numbers. To focus now on what issues may affect the party campaigns going into the last weekend, well, we're now joined by Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for LaPresse. Hello to all three of you.
Hi, Michael.
So listen, you know, as I said, looking into the stories that may affect this final weekend, and I need to begin here with Mark Carney, right? Because we know that Radio-Canada yesterday basically comes out with a story saying that Donald Trump did raise the issue of 51st State when the two of them had a conversation last month that was not referenced by Carney. And here he is, you know, talking about how positive that phone call was. It has led the NDP and the Bloc Québécois essentially raising questions about how well Mr. Carney can be trusted. Is this a case of the Liberals hobbling themselves right before they hit the finish line, Bob?
Well, I don't think it is. I think people have pretty much made up their minds. This is not an issue that's going to move people. First of all, it's a bit confusing to begin with. Look, Mr. Carney could have been much more forthcoming when he spoke to us after that March 28th meeting. But we also in the media have a role to play in this too, because we didn't do our job very well. I think we were all stuck by the fact that the President referred to Mr. Carney as the Prime Minister, how it was a really good conversation, and we weren't used to that from Mr. Trump, who had already been belittling Justin Trudeau all the time. And I think what we should have said, and we should have pushed him hard on, did he mention the 51st state? And nobody really pushed him on that. So he didn't volunteer. And now we know that it was raised because what all he said was, well, he respected our sovereignty. Which he really didn't in a way, because he raised the 51st state. So, but this is not an issue that's going to have a big effect on the electorate.
Okay, a non-issue, and to your point, the reason why the NDP and the Bloc are raising this is because they're looking for any, dent in the armor to try to get some advantage going into this final weekend. What do you make of the impact of this revelation, Tonda?
Well, I mean, won't surprise you, I'm going to disagree with Bob.
That's why we invite you.
I think that it may not affect anyone's vote, but that's not to say that there's not a legitimate question, I think, to be asked about his willingness to be transparent in that case. And yes, perhaps, the exact questions weren't asked in some exact prosecutorial way to elicit that answer. But it was, I was in a news conference with him that next day, and we were distinctly left with a different impression. And I have seen this on a couple of occasions with Mr. Carney, where he's prepared to be evasive if it's politically expedient. And that's not a trait, I think, that is a great one to have. And so I think that for the Conservatives, it may strengthen, though, the impressions that are already held within their support base. I agree with Bob in respect of it doesn't necessarily change a big swing in the vote at this stage, because it also gave Trump, or rather Carney, another ability to trumpet his ability to deal with Trump. But I don't like that tendency of his.
Okay, Joël-Denis?
Imagine a second if that revelation had come before the debate. This would have been one of the big issues raised during that debate in French or in English by the Bloc Québécois, the NDP, or even Pierre Poilievre. So I think it's a matter of transparency. I think that Mr. Carney did not come up with the full story. We didn't see anything about that in the readout, and I agree with Bob. Maybe we should have done. Did Mr. Trump raise specifically the 51st state in the conversation?
A lesson for all of us to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't trust that guy.
Yeah.
Be careful what he says.
Or be suspicious. Double check, triple check, or
demand transparency.
Yeah.
You know, I
so
was
it's not a lesson for us.
Well, when I heard him yesterday dance around and try to explain it away, but finally be forced to admit that yes, it was he did say this. I went back to his book where he talked about leadership and what makes a good leader, and one of the top traits is transparency, accountability, be clear, admit your mistakes, all of the things he did not do yesterday. And so I thought, hypocrisy doesn't look good on any politician, so yeah.
But whether or not it affects it very quickly.
We're learning what type of politician Mr. Carney will be, because he's brand new at that game. So we're trying to figure out where does he stand on some stuff. Should we interpret some of his answers? Should we ask him more questions about some topics? So it's a learning experience for us.
Yeah, 100%. Like I wrote that last week. His education as a politician is our education as an electorate. We are learning who he is as Prime Minister. And, he may well end up with a majority government after Monday, or a minority government. But now I think that we all have learned a big lesson here.
Okay, well, let's switch over, because one politician Conservatives know very well is Pierre Poilievre. And just a few days ago, we saw the Nova Scotia Premier, Tim Houston, a progressive Conservative. He released a video onto social media. Basically, it invited speculation about an early bid to try to be the next federal leader of the Conservative Party. And to that, the Ontario Premier was asked about, is this what's happening? Take a listen to what we heard from Doug Ford.
People are interpreting it as maybe dipping his toe in the waters of testing a potential future CPC leadership bids. What do you think of that?
I love. Well, something. Let's see what happens. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, and let's see what happens on the 28th.
Okay, so let's see what happens. But are we actually seeing animosity between the premiers of Ontario and Nova Scotia, again, both progressive Conservatives, against Pierre Poilievre? Bob?
Yeah, we sure are. I mean, but it's Pierre Poilievre's fault. Here's a guy who never reached out after became leader of the Conservative Party to reach out to Doug Ford, who was a very popular figure in this province, did not want anything to do with him because he wasn't right-wing enough. We know they didn't want to have anything to do with Premier Houston at all because he's a progressive Conservative. They didn't want to have anything to do with Jean Charest, who is a former premier of Quebec and one hell of a good campaigner. Imagine if Jean Charest was campaigning for them in Quebec, and Tim Houston was campaigning for them in Nova Scotia, and Doug Ford was campaigning for them in Ontario. It would be an entirely different picture. In 1984, Brian Mulroney had Bill Davis went and introduced them at every rally in Ontario, every rally. Because what did Brian Mulroney want to do? He wanted to build a big tent. Mr. Poilievre and Jenny Byrne, they don't want a big tent. They only want a conservative, hard right conservative tent, and they're going to pay the price for it. 90 ridings where it was held by Ms. Byrne and Mr. Poilievre for their own selection. So people who believe in grassroots democracy at the local level, they got shut out, and those people are very angry.
Yeah, well, and John DeYoung famously wanted to run for the Conservatives of British Columbia, now running as independent, former finance minister. What do you make of
this? He'll split the vote, the Conservative vote out there, and he may win it as an independent, whereas he could have been a Conservative MP. No, and on that point, I do agree with Bob. Like this is an extraordinary unfolding of a fight within the tent, and it's not just. Mr. Ford, you caught his grin there, and you know he emphasized to you yesterday that I'm a progressive conservative.
I interviewed him yesterday in Toronto.
But this is not just a fight between progressive and red Tory, blue Tory. This fight, certainly in Ontario, is a fight between sort of the campaign manager for Doug Ford and the campaign manager for Jenny Byrne, are both of the original United Conservative Movement family, and it's a more deeply personal feud going on in that case. And they've blown up the bridges with the Nova Scotia Conservatives now because, they weren't doing as they were told, supporting Mr. Poilievre. So this is bad all around for them, and I think they'll pay a price. I do agree.
Yeah,
it's quite a spectacular family feud that we're witnessing among the Conservatives and the Progressive. And
with a few days left in a vote.
Yeah, exactly. And in politics, everybody says that you need to addition, you need to add on. And what Monsieur Poilievre over the last 2 years, and with the help of Jenny Byrne, they've been subtracting. And if you can afford to subtract Doug Ford from the equation, you're doomed to hit a wall. And that's what will probably happen in Ontario. Ontario is the critical province, as we repeat on every election. It remains so. If you can't succeed in Ontario, you're doomed to finish your the election night on the opposition benches, and that's probably the scenario that awaits the Conservative Party.
122 seats. I mean, majorities will be made there. So
yeah, governments are built, majorities made, absolutely. So that said, let's fast forward to election night, Monday. You're going to be a little bit on our program, so I appreciate that, Bob. Talk to us about what you're watching out for between now and election night.
Well, I'm just watching right now where the candidates are going. Mr. Poilievre seems to be going. We've actually spent a lot of time in British Columbia now, but he's also gone into places where they're trying to save seats. Why is he going into Calgary? Why is he going into Saskatoon? The Liberals haven't won a seat in Saskatoon since 1993, but he feels the need to go into Saskatoon.
Because usually these are seats that you can ignore and go elsewhere.
Well, campaigns are usually one where leaders, when they're if they're playing defense, you're in trouble. And that's not the case with Mr. Carney. He's not playing defense. He's going into ridings that are held by Conservatives and New Democrats because he thinks he can take those seats. And that's what I'm watching over the next couple of days. And also, frankly, I get if you're watching Poilievre, particularly yesterday, I found he was very dark about what he was talking about.
Yeah,
and also his message
the message for the last number of days has been a very dystopian one about the future under the Liberals. So, yeah.
And what are you watching for?
Also that, and Pierre Poilievre has not been into Saskatchewan only once since he's been leader. So going there is a clear signal that they see a Liberal, 1 or 2 seats in Saskatchewan. And for them, that takes away a big argument that the Liberals don't represent the whole country. If the Liberals can gain a seat there and gain seats in Alberta, then they potentially have seats all across the country. Undercuts his big argument. So the offense-defense play, but also the messaging. At what point do any of them signal they know their fate? The next few days are just interesting from anyone who's a political junkie, you know, the campaign messaging, the travels, but what lies ahead? You know, what lies ahead next week potentially? Well, first of all, it's the start of dramatic trade talks and potentially two leadership challenges from within their parties or from outside their parties for the losers.
Yeah, Joël-Denis?
Obviously, I'll be watching where the leaders are going, but also whether Mr. Carney will come out and clearly claim or demand a clear national strong mandate from voters. And that has yet to be made. He started a bit in that sense. I think he doesn't want to project overconfidence. He wants to be as, you know, cool as possible. But that's going to be an interesting call to make, because I think in the current context, while we're facing threats from the United States, I would argue that we need a stable government in Ottawa, whether it's a conservative one or a liberal one, so that they can make decisions and not be worried about political shenanigans in the House of Commons, whether they're going to survive 18 months and we're going to be back at it in less than 2 years. So that's what I'll be watching, mostly Mr. Carney, whether he's going to make the call for a strong majority.
Okay, so whether or not he makes that call, Joël-Denis, Tonda, thank you. And Bob, since you're going to be here Monday, I can tell you what is coming up. Pizza at 5, sandwiches midnight. So we'll have that for you while you're here.
No coffee? No coffee?
Oh my God, that's intravenous. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Well, you heard Tonda mention my interview with Premier Doug Ford yesterday. Now, that took place at the Public Policy Forum's 2025 Growth Summit, an event that I've now emceed for 2 years running. Take a listen to what the Ontario Premier had to say about his politics.
There's no secret. When I was born, I was stamped with a C on my forehead as a conservative. But lately, I've been getting, you're a bleeding heart liberal, you're this, you're that. No, I don't care about political stripes. I really don't. I work with the liberal federal government. Excellent. You know, I'd work with the conservative government. I think the world of Olivia Child, NDP mayor, Wab Canoe. He's my champion out in Manitoba. I said I'm going to give him counseling. He's politically misguided because he sounds like a conservative about the NATO, and I love the guy. He's amazing. So we all have to work together. And honestly, I can't stand political stripes. And don't get me wrong, I'm proud to be the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. That's what I like doing.
And that wasn't all. I asked Premier Ford as well about interprovincial trade and what he thinks about Donald Trump's comments on Canada. Take a listen to what the Premier had to say about that.
Sometimes I think the cheese slips off the cracker with this guy. He wakes up in the morning. No, but he does. Like, he wakes up in the morning, and even his people around him are not too sure what he's going to do or what he's going to say, and it's pretty scary that, you know, one sentence out of the most powerful person in the world can change markets. You know, yeah, we saw them bounce back a little bit, but it wasn't about protecting Wall Street. It was about protecting Main Street. These people that rely here, right here in Ontario, be it OMERS or the Teachers' Pension Fund or any of the pension funds, you know, they took a hit of a couple $2 billion. And we saw the loss down there. And it's about certainty. And he's created uncertainty around the world.
You know, we've heard Mark Carney through the course of this campaign talking about July the 1st. By then, things will be unlocked.
Yes.
What's your measure of where we are right now?
Well, I think everyone wants it, but there's a lot of protectionism, and that's what's happened over the years, and they want exceptions. And we led the country in getting rid of all exceptions. You know, if an electrician has his license in wherever, BC or Alberta, they should be good enough to practice in Ontario. Or if a doc or a nurse gets their license in wherever, Nova Scotia, they should be able to practice anywhere in the country. And that's exactly what we're doing. So they're coming on board. I'm getting calls every single day, especially after they see Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. Had our friend from PEI call up, Saskatchewan, Alberta. They're all going to come on board. And we just can't have any exceptions. And what I mean by that, well, we're going to join, but we have 2 or 3 exceptions. No, we have to open it right up. And as Ontario, the largest market, They should be doing cartwheels to say, hey, we have an opportunity to go after the largest market in the country and one of the largest markets in North America.
Are you optimistic that by July the 1st, things will be moving?
I'm optimistic we'll meet that target before July the 1st. They're going to come fast and furious as we start moving.
Well, one more note before we go this evening. The public viewings at St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City have now come to an end. According to the Associated Press, more than 250,000 people have lined up and paid their respects over the last 3 days, saying their final goodbyes to Pope Francis I, who died on Easter Monday. His state funeral will take place tomorrow morning in St. Peter's Square, after which Pope Francis will be buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome. That was his wish, and it is a break in tradition with other popes who've been laid to rest in the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica. Now, as for the funeral, it will start at 4 a.m. Eastern Time, but we will play it back for you in full for audiences here in Canada, starting at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Atlantic Time. And that is our program for this Friday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back on Tuesday, but on Monday night, we will have our election special for you here. That begins at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you election night. Until then, have a great weekend.